spaces that seemed to be most successful were the ones where there was a really clear mission to have it be a community space.
This is Keys to the Shop, episode 551, an encore episode of Designing the Guest Experience with Dr. Lisa Waxman. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFerio. I am your host for the show. And of course, I'm glad to have you around today. If you are new to the show, there's a lot of episodes to keep up with. I don't expect you to keep up with all of them because at this point, I'm guessing, I think I looked it up. It's about 1,010, 1,015. Anyway, we've published a lot of episodes, but the best way for you to consume this show, which sounds kind of funny to say, consume or listen to this show, is to search the episodes. You can do that online on keystotheshop.com, but better yet, subscribe to the show. Do that on Spotify, do that on Overcast, do it on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast streams. YouTube as well. You can see me waving to you here on the YouTube channel. When you subscribe, you can search the library of past episodes, and that is a great way to come up with content around training or management and leadership or coffee and coffee roasting and that kind of stuff. We cover a large variety of topics related to running a great coffee shop and a great coffee business. So subscribe to the show. And also, if you already are a listener and you haven't yet subscribed, again, I would encourage you to do that. But let's say that you have been a listener for a while. Great way to help the show. Of course, share the episodes on social media, but also I would say leave a rating or review. If you love what we do, give a 5-star rating, a short comment, a feedback, what you love about the show on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. And it just really helps the show be found by more people who are looking for the kind of resources that we provide here. So now I will say the season is upon us where normally I would tell you, hey, we do consulting and coaching. Well, kind of in a roundabout way, I've just said so. So we do consulting and coaching, and that is something that is always available to you one-on-one with me. Keys to the Shop Consulting has helped over 85 different coffee shops and coffee businesses over the last 8 years. And I would love to have a conversation with you. But one of the things that we have developed in the last 2 years here, and we're getting ready for our 5th season, is the key holder coaching groups. Now, if you go to the website, keystotheshop.com, you will see the term coaching groups up at the top. That is a new page, and that's something that I'm going to link to in the show notes for you to just click on, and it'll take you right to a place where you can apply. You can learn more about the key holder coaching groups and what they are. I'll just tell you really quick. They are a paid mastermind style cohort of 5 to 6 coffee shop owners that have coffee shops that are brick and mortar. 2+ years of experience in operation is the requirement for people to join up. But beyond that, we just do interviews to see if it's a right fit. We curate the groups. And when I say we, this is me facilitating these groups personally every season. We do 6 months of every other week meeting for 2 hours. Each member gets a focused amount of time to help their business. The group helps each other. It is a cohort. It is a time for encouragement, accountability, insights from other people, different levels of the industry, different places usually it's the United States. And, as we expand, we might be doing more things related to people that can join us internationally. With a time zone, it makes it a little tricky. But if you're looking for community that really just gets it, a community of coffee shop owners to work together for the next 6 months, you can start 2026 on the right foot with a lot of great insights. We're going to start this next group in the mid to later part of September. So now is your time to apply to the key holder coaching groups. You can find more information on the website, keystotheshop.com. Just click on coaching groups and that will take you right there. So today our episode is sponsored by the lovely folks at Arto Brick, at Arto Brick on Instagram, and then the Pacific Barista series, that is pacificfoodservice.com. We're going to talk more about them later on in the episode, but right now, this is an encore episode. I mentioned we've been on the show here or on the air for a long time. This is back from 2019. We talked with a professor in Florida, Florida State University, Dr. Lisa Waxman, all about designing the guest experience. She has written a couple of books on this subject. We've had her on the show twice, once to talk about designing the guest experience and the other to talk about her brand new book, which was about designing coffee shops for community. And I think I have it behind me somewhere in my office, but I'm not going to trot it out to show you. Just believe me, it's a great book. But believe me, you're going to want to read these books because what we do in coffee shop is set up environments to produce a particular result. And so Dr. Lisa Waxman, Ph.D., is an award-winning professor and chair of the Interior Architecture and Design Department at Florida State University. Her research includes topics related to the design of spaces that fosters community, sustainable design, and design for special populations. And she also serves on the board of directors for the Council of Interior Design Accreditation. Lots of scholarly works. Her particular study, The Coffee Shop, Social and Physical Factors Influencing Place Attachment, is wonderful. And you can find the link for that in the show notes as well if you want to read that study. So today I'm going to re-air an episode from a long while back to rekindle your interest in fine-tuning the curation and construction of cafe environments. And the reason I'm bringing this back up again, I think, is because today we are seeing the commodification of coffee shops as a sort of utilitarian entity. And for a lot of history, they've been a little bit more of that third place, transcendent, and yet still somehow stayed in business. We believe right now somehow that the only way that we can stay in business is to just maximize the throughput of our coffee shops and just squeeze blood from a stone, so to speak. But we haven't really set up our coffee shops to do something that I think coffee shops can do very well, to earn trust and loyalty, and something that touches the heart and the mind of the customer in a way that businesses can actually do if they are about connection and they do so intentionally. And it starts with how you design your space and how you're thinking through the placement of things, the effect, the downstream impact of your decisions, whether that's socially with the words you speak, or it's physically with the space, or even the coffee you serve. Everything serves to produce a result together. And so, of course, we want to focus on the coffee shop because it literally is the thing that we build to welcome people into, and we want that to work very well. So I'm going to give it over to the past me, interviewing Dr. Lisa Waxman on the show, talking about designing the guest experience. So I hope you enjoy. Hello, Dr. Waxman. Welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I came across your study in an Inc. magazine article about gaining customer loyalty through science, and your study provided some really great feedback to operators about what people look for in a coffee shop. And of course, that piqued my interest. And now here we are. And I'm really honored to be able to talk with you. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about your academic background and how this led you to sort of spearhead this study on coffee shops and why that's such a passion project of yours in particular.
Sure. Well, I'm educated as an interior designer, and so my degrees are in interior design. And in that profession, we focus a lot on the user experience and creating quality experiences and environments for people. That's what we specialize in. So over the years, my research interests have focused on how designers can create spaces that support users. And I'm specifically interested in creating a sense of place and feelings of place attachment in my design. So feeling very strongly about design and the contribution to community and just connecting with others as part of our daily orbit. And so there's a lot of factors that contribute to having a quality experience, in a location, and design, of course, is a big part of that picture. It's not everything, but it is a piece of that. early research, I explored actually assisted living communities and how they could support seniors in creating a new community for them. So I looked at where pockets of social interaction were taking place and how the design supported that. So not coffee shops, but that was some of my early research. And then later when it came time to write my dissertation, I knew I wanted to focus on design that fostered a sense of community. My grandparents owned a sandwich shop in Worcester, Massachusetts. And so I grew up hearing stories of the shop and of the patrons, and my grandmother cooked all the cakes. And, so it was very much sort of in our family to think about, a shop and to think about the community. And my grandfather owned it during the Depression. So it was a time when he would often feed people who needed to be fed. And so that, kind of something that I really valued. And then I read Ray Oldenburg's book, The Great Good Place. He's my hero. So I loved his philosophy on the third place and the importance of third place. And then concerns that, some third places were disappearing in our society. So I also noticed that there seemed to be a lot of coffee shops popping up in my community, and students were studying in coffee shops. And I started, going there to grade papers and realizing that, wow, something is really happening here. And so I decided to make my dissertation about, what is it that draws people? What are the social and the physical characteristics of coffee shops that are impacting the client experience? And obviously coffee is a big part of it, but what else was it as a designer, that I could sort of tap into and potentially make a contribution to? So Ray Oldenburg talks a lot about the third place, and probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with that term, but, home is our first place and work is our second place. So our third places are those places that sort of contribute to our everyday existence, that again, help us interact with the community, the people that we encounter on a daily basis. So they could be coffee shops or cafes or bar shops or places that provide that kind of sort of home away from home and a sense of being connected to the people that we live among. So it's great work by Oldenburg. And so I tried to build on that a little bit by focusing on the design piece of it.
Yeah, that absolutely seems like it would contribute greatly to whether or not you could feel that sense of community. And I love, just like you, Ray Oldenburg's work, where it seems as you explore that topic, we create them, even if they're not there. It could be outside of a place in just a stoop that you gather with your friends too. We have this almost primal need to be with other people in that third place. And of course, coffee shops just seem like they're magnets for that desire, a great outlet for that desire. What was the approach that you took to this study? How did it get conducted, and how did you pull results?
Well, I looked at it from several different angles. I conducted a survey of coffee shop patrons and asked basic demographic questions. I asked them how they got to the coffee shop. Did they walk or drive or ride their bike? Just wondering, how easy it was for them to get there and if it was in their local community. And then I asked them about the design characteristics, because that's my field. So I looked at what they liked about the shop they went to, but also what they thought of as ideal, kind of if they could create a coffee shop in the way that they would like to see it. So things like lighting, background music, acoustics, the actual aroma that you sense when you come in, cleanliness, furniture, comfort, color, those types of things. And then, so that was more of the physical piece. Then I also asked questions about socialization. If they go there to socialize, or how often they do. They enjoy people watching. If they bring pets, or do they like to smoke outside? Because I'm in Florida, so outside spaces work pretty well here. So how does that fit in? And then I also asked if they felt part of the community and if they were happy living in the community. And then eventually I ran correlations on that. And then I also spent many hours observing in coffee shops. And I only chose those that had been open at least 5 years because I wanted to get more established shops to ensure that, I was looking at places that had been successful. And then I did something called behavioral mapping, which is essentially recording what's going on in a space for evaluation later. And you kind of note anything that you think might be interesting, no matter how trivial, because sometimes that ends up being important later. And then finally, to better understand things, I conducted interviews with coffee shop patrons, a coffee shop staff member, and either an owner or a manager to get their perceptions of it. So I thought it was important to hear from the patrons, but also to hear from the staff, because they're there every day and kind of have a feeling of what's going on. And then from that, I ran some, hardcore numbers with the survey data, but then I also did what's called a qualitative analysis, where you code it and you look for what we call emergent themes. So things that begin to kind of pop up the page as being significant. You start to see these, coming up multiple times in different coffee shops, kind of described by different people, and you begin to kind of develop patterns that appear. So that's how I did it.
Well, what were you expecting, and what did you find in this? Because I imagine we all come into this with some preconceived notions of what's probably going to show up, no matter how unbiased we try to be. But what were your perceptions going in, and then what were the results of all of that data?
Yeah, so because I had read The Great Good Place by Oldenburg, I had some ideas of what a third place was about, including that there would be regulars there, that the mood would be somewhat playful, that people would feel like they're coming in on neutral ground, that everybody was welcome. So those were things I was kind of expecting to find, and I did find. And so, going in, there were some expectations. I tried to be as neutral as I could. But of course, when you're doing qualitative research, you are filtering it through your own lens. But then there were some really interesting things that came out of it as well that I didn't expect to find. So some of the results that I found when I coded the data, it became clear that there were the physical attributes and then the social attributes that make the space successful, and that they're both important. So the physical factors, these came really from the survey data, and these are kind of in order of importance. But the first thing was cleanliness, and I think part of that is that people, when you ask them on a survey, is cleanliness important, and how important is it? They typically feel like they need to say that it is. So that ended up, rising right to the top. But then next was appealing aroma, and so I think it's important when you walk in a place. One of the first impressions is that smell and that aroma, and so you want to kind of create those strong memories that are going to potentially stay with you and pull you back. So you want to make sure that that's a good smell, and that you aren't killing the smell with disinfectant. There's a really great donut shop here in Tallahassee, and I've stopped going in because the donuts are great, but it smells like disinfectant. So, so just that aroma ended up being, the second most important thing. And then adequate lighting. So a lot of people go to read the paper or read a book or maybe do homework. And so having, the ability to have adequate lighting was really important. And of course, for older readers, usually when you hit about 40, you need a little bit of help to see. And then as you get older, even more so. And older folks need more light to be able to see than they did when they were younger. So that becomes especially important if you have an older crowd, an older clientele in the shop. So doesn't mean uniform, bright light with no character. That's, not what we're talking about here, but a nice ambient overall lighting combined with more lighting where it's needed, whether it's lamps or access to sit by, a window or those types of things that allow your variety of patrons of different ages to feel like they can come in and, relax and enjoy the space. And then comfortable furniture was also listed as really important. And of course, my interest as a researcher is creating gathering places, that welcome people. But I also understand that for people running a coffee shop, they may also need to be able to have people, come in and stay a while but then leave. And so one of the problems that occurred in some of the places I observed was, I don't know if you're familiar with the term campers, but I learned of that. Yeah, the folks who come in and stay for hours and hours, and they may buy a cup of coffee, but then they sit there, they're 5 hours later. So, at a restaurant, you typically would be presented with a bill at the end of the meal, and you would pay and leave. But in a coffee shop, sometimes you end up with people who are staying too long. that cup of coffee is their ticket to linger. And so in that case, the comfortable furniture is awesome for the patrons. But, sometimes in talking to managers, they would say, gosh, we want to make sure that the people coming in, once the seats are full, that's a little frustrating. Are they going to be able to have a place to stay? So there was a little bit of so patrons love the comfortable seating. They love the kind of off the wall, comfy stuffed chairs and the sofas. But, often that did encourage them to feel like they could stay a little bit longer. I also found that groups wanted to be able to pull tables together. If you're having a little book club meeting or, something along those lines, a little place to get organized for a community event, pulling tables together. So square tables work better for that. Another finding, something that we talk about a lot with our students here at Florida State, is designing so people have feelings of what we call prospect and refuge, which is a theory that says people feel comfortable and safer when they have their back protected, which is the refuge piece, and then they're able to see the room, take in the room, which is the prospect. It comes from our natural tendency to want to sort of protect ourselves and know what's coming. And maybe also a little bit in today's world, our desire to people watch. So that idea of locating furniture in a way that allows for that prospect and refuge. And not every seat can do that. But I noticed in one of the things I looked at with behavioral mapping is where people sat first. And so those seats were almost always seats that had the prospect and refuge, or seats near natural light, or the more comfortable seating when there was a mixture of comfortable and less comfortable seating. So interesting things to look at that. And then views to the outside, and I'll kind of combine that with a desire for natural light here. Most people enjoy nature, and that need for nature is strong. And we know the need for nature is restorative, as is access to natural light. So feeling connected to the outside and knowing sort of what the weather's doing, and also getting the great light that comes in from the outside. It's typically a warm, welcoming light. And so that helped to create a nice environment. So those were some of the physical things, along with acoustics. And so, I'll put music here too, even though they really are two different things. But in the case of acoustics, in the third place, conversation should be possible in the third place. So unless you're having like a musical performance where people are coming to hear, say, a guitar player, which, has been advertised. Obviously, that's a different scenario. People are coming to hear the music. But on a typical day, you want to make sure your background music still allows for conversation, because that is an essential part of the third place, is to be able to have a conversation. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of going out to dinner with friends, and you're someplace where it's so loud that you realize that you can't catch up with the people you're trying to catch up with. So kind of finding that happy medium. And then just the visual appeal of the space. I didn't do a lot on color. That is something I wished I had asked more about. But most of the responses I got related to color were a preference for warmer colors. So those are your reds, oranges, yellows, and typically most of your wood tones or variations of those colors were typically thought of as more coffee shop appropriate. Although there's definitely a need for more research on that.
Well, hey everyone, it's Chris again, and I wanted to take a moment here in the middle of the episode just to say that I think part of today's episode really needs to focus on one of our sponsors, and that is Arto Brick. Of course, we're talking about designing the guest experience from a cafe design, physical location perspective. Arto Brick has helped many cafes, amongst other industries. Cafes are one of the ones they love the most. They create stone, tile, hard surfaces that really make what you imagine come to life. And so if you want the best kind of feel, the handmade in the US in Los Angeles from a family run and operated business that is trusted by architects and coffee shops and designers the world over, then check out arto.com, and especially check them out on Instagram, Arto Brick, ARTO Brick. And Armin, one of the owners there, would love to get a DM from you. Let him know that you heard from Keys to the Shop, that they're the place to go for tiles, hard surfaces, stonework in your shop. The work they do really does create a wonderful guest experience. And so big thanks to Arto. Also, the Pacific Barista Series is our other sponsor today. Go to pacificfoodservice.com and check them out. They have been the leader in plant-based beverages for quite a long time. They are designed to stand up to the heat from steaming, produce great texture for latte arts, and also keep the balance of the beverage focused on coffee. One of the things that I love about them too is the fact that they have supported financially and with their presence at countless events, the coffee community. So they are connected. They are a large company, but they are connected with the industry and they listen. That's why their products work so well. So check them out, pacificfoodservice.com for the Pacific Barista series. Now back to our episode. So, wow, this is a lot. It's all the physical characteristics that have a huge implication on whether or not somebody is going to feel emotionally cared for, as well as physically cared for. They're sort of inextricably linked, right? So, going into a space that you talked about having your back protected. I want my experience protected. I want to know. I joked around with some people here in Louisville. I said, I want to be able to log on to a weather map and find out what the internal temperature of coffee shops is today, so I cannot be frozen out. There's little things. It's a sensory experience, and all of the things you talked about, the cleanliness, the aroma, the lighting, the furniture, and the views to the outside, and just all of that stuff is sort of the blend of desires that customers have. But you mentioned also that you interviewed workers and owners about these things. And you alluded to this with the furniture and how there's this tension between, do we want people to be on this, lazy boy, or do we want to encourage them to move on by putting like sharp bumps in the seat of the seat? Right?
That's right. Yeah.
So what did you find? Was there any differences between the results you got from the owners and managers versus the patrons?
Well, it's funny because one of the places that I spent a lot of time and interviewed the manager, and she was great. And this was actually a fairly large bookstore with a coffee shop that is like a national chain. But it was so successful in this community as a third place that I went ahead and went there, even though typically I was looking for more sort of locally owned types of spaces. And so the coffee shop there was packed all the time, and there definitely were their share of campers. And so I said to the manager, who was like I said, was wonderful and very interested in what I was doing. And I said, you could probably expand this coffee shop. She says, we don't make any money on the coffee shop. She said, yeah. She goes, in fact, people go and they get the books from the bookstore, and then they go and they sit in the coffee shop and read them. So, and they don't buy them. So she said, yeah. So we actually, if anything, we would have a smaller coffee shop so that people would buy the coffee and then buy the books. But it was interesting because my perception of it was like comfort and well-being and creating this warm, cozy space for people. But, she was very much about, having to account for the profits and that kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And in that particular space, they had I think a nice mix of things. They had a little sofa area with comfortable chairs that was kind of by a window where a great light came in. They had a fairly good-sized round table where you'd often we're a college town, so you'd see lots of students come in and having group meetings there. And then they had other sort of 2-top and 4-top tables that you could pull together, but they weren't necessarily comfortable for hours long of a time. So they had kind of a nice mixture there of things. I think that's part of the reason it was successful. And they had a great light coming in the whole space on 2 walls, so that helped too. In all of the places that you've seen investigating this, do you feel that coffee shops, the way that we are now with coffee shops, lean more toward community spaces and being friendly for that, or more towards a transactional get them in, get them out, and sacrifice some of that community building, those community building elements? Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the community building elements are really important, and there are places that I have visited and talked to the managers where they went into this with a clear mission that it was going to be a community space, and that was part of their goal. And they're willing to sort of stand by that, even if it means occasionally maybe a little bit less profit. So when I'm seeing both, I'm seeing, coffee shops that are more corporately owned and all over the country. I guess I probably shouldn't name names, but that you see everywhere that are they're very predictable. And, I occasionally shop there if I'm traveling because I know, you kind of know what you're going to get. But I think most people who are settled in a community when they're home, kind of in their comfort zone, they're going to be looking for their place that is unique. And so there still seems to be a need for that and a desire for that. And so I'm seeing a lot of those as well. So I guess it depends on like where you are and what your needs are at the time. Most of the communities that I've spent time in have kind of a mixture of both. People, appreciate them for what they are. But there is that search, and I think with millennials, especially, I'm the mother of a millennial. So, I kind of have tuned into that generation and what they're looking for. And my students are millennials, and they're looking for that authenticity. I know that's kind of an overused word, but they want things that feel connected to the local. They want to go in and feel like it's their place, that it doesn't look like every other place, and that there's some kind of connection with whether it be local artists or local art displayed or local poetry readings or just the photographs or the art in the space are of places that feel authentic and feel like they're kind of emerging more organically than corporate driven.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because this is just my preconceptions going into this, that especially in urban areas, and as we become a little bit more isolated through social media, the ability to discover what is local and what is not, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And so if something is truly authentically an expression of the local community, you can discover that in this place. It's easier to do that there than it is to do it on an app or in your smaller group of like physically present friends. But it kind of makes me want to ask about this next question I have for you, which is about the social aspects, because we're talking about the physical, but the social aspects of your study and the results of that. What were the results, and what should we learn from that?
Sure. Well, many of your listeners may have heard of the term place attachment, which is it's a great term that is about this relationship that forms between people in place. And so it's also tied in very closely with another term called place identity, which is about sort of how we define ourselves and who we are and what we value and how that links to place, and so maybe it's as simple as going to a farmer's market to buy groceries to help the local economy and to know that, where your food is coming from or those types of things. It's very similar. But what I found when it came to the social features is a real sense of territoriality and ownership, and the idea that patrons want to sort of lay claim to a place in an area that they feel is theirs. And so there is this sense of ownership sometimes where, this is my place. And most of the time that's a good thing. Every now and then I saw where, people would walk behind the counter and get what they wanted on their own, or which was usually okay, with the patrons, because they knew the people and knew this. Every now and then I saw examples and talked to owners who said, they decided to rework the counter configuration, or they got rid of some of the furniture and brought in some other, and so somebody's favorite chair got given away. And so you do occasionally see people who really feel like almost like it's a co-op, in a way. And so that was interesting. But for the most part, it was a good thing, that people felt this connection and this ownership. They often did have their favorite spots. And sometimes there were groups of, say, retired men who would come in every morning and always sit at the same table. There was also a feeling of support. Even though coffee has to be good, it is about, more than coffee when it comes to long-term, sort of the relationships that you might have with other patrons or with the staff or the owner. And so, many of the people felt a strong attachment to the staff, like even felt that they were extended family. And people have come in, just to grieve over a loss or to, celebrate, life's accomplishments with people in the coffee shop. So there was definitely that. And then one of the things that really emerged was the importance of trust and respect. So in interviews, one person said to me, I remember, trust, you have to know that they care about you and that it's a safe place. So people need to be able to feel welcome. And the coffee shop ideally should welcome people from different backgrounds and views to come together kind of peacefully in one place. And then there were, just the social factors that came together with the regulars. And of course, those are the people who frequently hang out and help give the place its character and sort of set the tone. And then other groups that were common were students, especially in university committees or communities and professors as well. And then a really strong group of retired folks. That was a very common thing, mostly men first thing in the morning. And I didn't follow up on this with detail, but I wondered if they need to continue their routine of kind of getting up and getting out, and that provides sort of purpose to the morning and people who are expecting them, and that conversation that you have with the barista and then with your friends there became really important to a lot of people. And then families with children, some places had a children's section. So that was, something that I saw, although, not every place would want to promote that, but I did see some of that. And then teenagers, although occasionally, teenagers can take over a space too. So that was it's a little important. And then another concept that I thought was really interesting when it came to the social is the value of familiar strangers. And so these are the people who we may not know their name, but we see them on a regular basis, and maybe we just exchange a smile with them or a brief hello or chat about the weather, but they end up becoming an important part of your day and your kind of your expectation of your day. And I've seen so many examples where those familiar strangers ended up being taken care of by patrons of the coffee shop. Like if an elderly person suddenly didn't show up, then people would check on them. Or if a woman who was pregnant stopped coming, people would check, And so even though they weren't, they didn't have a strong friendship, they were, kind of part of your world, and you kind of felt this connection. So that's where the sort of social capital piece comes in, is that it's hard to ignore people who are part of our daily lives, and a coffee shop can provide this place to bring those people together. So those were a few of the things. So a lot going on, a lot of value in people's lives. And I would talk to, some new folks to the community. I remember talking to some international students separately who had just come to the US, who spoke English, enough to be here in school, but who did not feel comfortable just being out and about in town, but they could go to the coffee shop and study and greet the barista briefly and people watch. And they felt like they had connected with the community, that they had an outing, that they had, participated somehow in the community. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And when very, very little real interaction, as most people would define it, had happened, but yet there's a lot of value to them in having had that experience.
I love this whole conversation around social capital, and that there's investment into it. No matter what you do, it could be quality or not quality, you're going to influence your community one way or another. It seems like the coffee shop itself, the staff, you mentioned being welcoming to all different walks of life. And, you can build your business and try to attract a particular demographic that you feel is going to be more profitable and all of that. But you're going to attract a variety of people. Whether or not you keep them, I guess, is the function of your hospitality to them. And it seems like it would be really difficult to foster that sense of community, or at least kind of get the ball rolling with a coffee shop, if your staff or you yourself as the owner don't start that. Don't demonstrate the kind of welcoming spirit. So if you're sullen or short, curt with people, I mean, people still have community, but it seems like that would stifle it and not let it thrive. Is that something that you might have observed in the course of doing this study?
Absolutely. I think in the spaces that seem to be most successful from, again, I'm not looking at the books. I'm only looking at the space and the experience that people are having. But the ones that seem to be most successful were the ones where there was a really clear mission to have it be a community space, and people were welcome. The staff, usually it was the owner or the manager that really kind of set that tone with who they hire and who they retain, of course. And just the respect that was shown to people who came in, for sure.
So having all of these things obviously is an asset. What do you see people doing in coffee shop spaces in particular that are mistakes that kind of fly in the face of all of these positive things that customers want from a coffee bar, to serve those social needs? And what are we doing that's really shooting ourselves in the foot as a business that, ideally would be looking to be a part of a community and serve a community?
I did a study with a graduate student about 3 years ago, and she was interested in branding in the third place, and also kind of tying that in with sort of the vernacular architecture, and that kind of tied in with authenticity. And so what we found in that study is that people really did feel, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that they don't want a corporate feel. They don't want it to be uniform. They want it to kind of reflect the local. And, if the owners aren't local, then the manager is, and the values are clearly defined. And so people are looking for places that kind of reinforce their identity and align with their values. And so the way you brand the signage, the labeling, the decor, those types of things really matter in terms of potential mistakes. Is if I was opening a place, I would visit a lot of shops and see like where, some of the problem areas are when it comes to space planning. So, as you're laying it out, are people able to get in out of the weather when they want to order? Is there a bottleneck, right at the ordering area, or where people are picking up, and does that kind of encroach on where people are sitting or where people are waiting? And so, what is kind of that user experience? Because if it's a hassle, then people aren't going to want to come in, because even a super comfy coffee shop is going to have people who come in and just get their coffee and go because they've got to be somewhere else. So, is that experience going to be good for them as well? Is that going to be a pleasant ordering and pickup experience? And so sometimes you see, that either, taking a long time, or it's not clear where you're supposed to go, or you're, like I said, you're encroaching on somebody who's already sitting there. So those are some of the things that I see. And then, of course, making the decision on the furniture, whether you want things, people to linger, or whether you want to turn the tables over a little bit more. So I think those would be the most thing, really, trying to avoid something that feels like it just got unloaded off the truck already pre-made. So, yeah.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah. Somehow a McDonald's showed up one day on the corner of in my town, and it's like, that wasn't there last week. So wow. I think it really came off the truck in a pre-made fashion, or at least a good bit of it assembled. So, I think for most coffee shops, people are not looking for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole different model of business, I guess. Coffee as franchise, and you have to admire the speed. For sure. Marvel at the efficiency, but does it feed the soul? I mean, beyond the Happy Meal, I guess, maybe not, but I look at the landscape of coffee shops, and it seems like a lot of people would nod their heads in their mission statements to being a community space, being, all about their passion for their neighborhood and things like that. But then they design their spaces without considering what you just described. Right.
Yeah. I think, you can work on the branding in so many ways. And part of that is, you want to be careful not to deliberately unbrand, because that kind of has backfired on a few places as well, where they've come in and maybe been a large corporation, and then they have very deliberately tried to come across as sort of a locally owned, and then it ended up kind of backfiring. So that's been a kind of an interesting finding as well. Looking at who your guests are and what your values are is going to kind of drive what you want to do.
So when you're going through a space, when you're personally designing a space, do we just think about these elements and walk through just point by point on the floor plan or in like Google SketchUp or wherever we're kind of game planning this thing? What are some practical exercises that we can really do to make sure that we're considering all of the experiential elements that contribute to a great coffee shop?
Well, I think, the first thing that you always want to do is really think about the function. And so, we hear the term form follows function, but that really is true. I mean, you have to first think about what is it that you're doing? You're making coffee, are you grinding there on site? Are you, what do you need to do and how much space is that going to need? What do your employees need to be comfortable behind the counter? How much space are they going to need? And they'll know that, and hopefully the owner will know that. So getting that really solid, because if you don't have essential, what the guts of making it work, then, it doesn't matter how beautiful the colors are, so you've got to get that down and figure out how that's going to work. And then again, where do people order? Where do they pick up? And how does that kind of move through? And is there room, for people? Then once that's figured out, then going to, if I'm going to stay and enjoy my coffee, thinking about some of the things I mentioned where, do you have a view to the outside? Do you have opportunities for prospect and refuge where you kind of feel comfortable? Is there adequate lighting, whether it's natural lighting during the day, or if it's the evening, you're going to need some artificial lighting? Do I have the ability to come in with a group if I want to? Will the furniture allow me to be able to kind of pull that together and have a quick community meeting? Or I've even seen occasionally a coffee shop that would have like a kind of a little bit of a separate room that would encourage people to be able to meet it. That may not necessarily work for everybody. And then making sure that your lighting is such that not only does it provide adequate lighting, but it's interesting in that it isn't a uniform, fluorescent lighting above or whatever, but that you've got some varieties of ambient lighting, which is your overall illumination, and task lighting, which is, and then accent lighting, which is lighting that kind of enriches the space. So kind of looking for that lighting in a way that sort of accentuates the space. And then thinking about at least some pockets of comfortable furniture, and then the artwork that you may want to enlist local artists, or you may want to even have art that can be purchased. I've seen that used successfully in coffee shops, which allows you to kind of have a rotation of local artists, but also potentially come in and be able to, to make some purchases and that kind of thing. And then, of course, basic things like, restrooms, making sure that those are available and probably tucked a little bit out of the way. So I think that's what I'd look at. And then also thinking about an interesting ceiling. That's one of the things that often gets forgotten, is that there's a lot of design that can happen on the ceiling too, or just can be something as simple as dropping a ceiling over your ordering counter, or other features that kind of break up that what could be seen as sort of monotonous and kind of more of a corporate basic kind of feel to it.
Sort of a visual refuge.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
This is the kind of thing that is forgotten about, it seems, due to the stress of just everything else that goes into opening a business. You've got the deadlines, you've got ADA, you've got just all the details that you've got to figure out as an owner. And that's where someone like you comes in as an interior designer, as a specialist in this area, to give perspective. And I'm so thankful that we got to talk today about this, to provide perspective to people in that situation. Mindset wise, what is the most helpful mindset that a owner can have in order to kind of put on that interior designer hat and to make sure that these things are at top of mind in the right times, and not to forget about other things, but it can easily get pushed off to the side?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there, like you said, there are so many things, and depending on where you live in your local municipality, there are lots of hoops to jump through and getting permitting and yeah, Americans with Disabilities Act, of course, is code everywhere for us. And so we have to, follow all of that. So yeah, there is a lot going on there. So I would, really encourage people to take the time up front to realize that, like I said, the course, you want the copy to be good, but you also want to be able to creates, a space that people want to return to, where they've had this good experience, not, with the staff, with the coffee, but also with the space itself. And they can kind of relate to that, and they feel this sort of desire to return. So I guess my best advice would just be to realize that you've got to, you do have to pay attention to it, that is an important piece of it. Potentially hire an interior designer to help you, and there you go. And so that will, lots of, people in communities would love the chance to do that. So just, take advantage of the expertise that they have.
Yeah, it seems like it would pay for itself in the long run, if not the short run. Definitely.
Sure. Yeah.
So now, my last question to you, and this has just been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Of course.
What do you want the landscape of the coffee shop to look like in the future going forward? And like, what kind of an impact do you want your work to have on that particular space?
Sure. Well, I think, the idea that, tying it back to social capital, that there are lots of spaces in the community that can promote togetherness, that can promote feelings of belonging and rootedness. But one of the things that all those things have to have in common is place. And so the coffee shops have the potential to really serve that well. And so I think if owners and managers can just really realize that that's a big part of it, and that coffee shops really can contribute in that way, then, utilizing some of what I've written and what many others have written as well, just acknowledging that, good things can happen in a third place, and that design does make a difference to our overall, quality of life and our overall well-being, as well as, to the bottom line potentially of a shop.
Well, Dr. Waxman, thank you again. This is really going to help us going forward. Your work is fantastic. I appreciate all that you've done for creating more social capital, especially in places like coffee shops. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today on the show.
Oh, sure. Well, it was great talking to you, Chris. And I'm excited that you're interested in the work, and I wish you the best.
Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Lisa Waxman. Check out her work. You'll find the links in the show notes for her articles, the studies, the books. The work that she has done will, I hope, shape the way that you do your work. And that work is about human experiences within the context of a coffee shop, done in a way that produces this holistic result, like the coffee, the music, the chairs, the windows, in, of course, the hospitality we offer. It all makes a coffee shop experience that is unique to you because you have created it. You haven't just copied and pasted. You have thought through and designed the guest experience. So thankful for Dr. Lisa Waxman. Check out that work in the show notes. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, it is chris@keystotheshop.com. So that is my email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And I would encourage you to reach out if you have those questions, but also if you're interested in one-on-one coaching for yourself as the owner, or also for your management team. I've conducted many workshops, both in the coffee industry and outside the coffee industry, on site or virtually. These are very accessible ways to get some very focused coaching and Q&A and involvement and engagement with your team. And again, if you're looking just for one-on-one coaching and consulting for your business or yourself, then I'm available as well. So chris@keystotheshop.com, and check out our new landing page, Key Holder Coaching Groups. You can find coaching groups as a tab on keystotheshop.com. I'm really thankful for Jason over at Gray Leaf Media, who does a lot of work on our websites to help it run well. So check out Gray Leaf Media also if you're looking for some website help. That landing page is pretty cool. Jason does great work. Also has a coffee company, AJ Coffee. Check that out as well. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you being here on the show, listening and supporting. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.